The skies above Verdinia were torn asunder by the roar of engines and the heat of blazing fire. Invaders descended upon Naira's village, leaving nothing but chaos and ruin. Naira, a warrior of emerald skin and the last heir to her people, fought fiercely to protect her homeland. Her spear sliced through the first wave of invaders, but their numbers were too great. The air crackled with the energy of weapons, and the acrid scent of burning vegetation filled her nostrils. Her muscles ached as she spun her spear, its crystalline tip glowing with each strike against the enemy's armored suits. Her people's screams pierced the air, a cacophony of terror and desperation. "Hold the line!" Naira shouted, her voice hoarse from the smoke and the strain of battle. Her command was drowned out by the deafening steps of a massive mech suit, which crushed the village's wooden walls and sacred totems under its giant metal feet. The invaders, clad in hulking armor, trampled everything in their path: homes, sacred sites, and lives. They captured survivors, forcing them into slavery for their mining operations. Bleeding and battered, Naira was forced to retreat into the jungle, swearing to return and rescue her people. As she vanished into the thick foliage, she cast one last glance at her ravaged home, tears staining her face and mixing with the dust and blood on her emerald skin. "I will return," she whispered to the wind. "I will save you all." The jungle was dense, its shadows hiding both danger and possible salvation. Naira ran, her breath ragged, as the sound of metallic footsteps and mechanical drones grew nearer. The bioluminescent plants that usually illuminated her path now seemed dimmer, as though even they feared the invaders. She emerged onto the edge of a steep cliff, the roar of a chasm below like the growl of a hungry predator. She had no time to think. A patrol of invaders appeared behind her, their glowing visors scanning the area. Naira's heart pounded in her chest as she calculated her next move. The cliff edge crumbled beneath her feet, sending rocks tumbling into the abyss. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. A robotic voice crackled in the air. "Target acquired. Prepare to neutralize." Naira stepped back, the ground beneath her giving way. Suddenly, a shot rang out, striking the rock beneath her feet. She plummeted into the chasm, time slowing as the wind whipped past her ears. Closing her eyes, she braced for the end. But her fall was halted by a powerful grip on her wrist. "Hold on," a deep voice commanded. Naira looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. A human man, with dark skin, dirt-streaked clothes, and sharp eyes, had her in his grasp. His muscles strained as he pulled her back on a solid ground. Once safe, Naira immediately grabbed her spear and pointed it at him, the crystalline tip humming with energy just inches from his throat. "Let me go," she hissed, her voice filled with fear and suspicion. The man raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "Easy now," he said calmly. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have bothered saving you." He offered a small, cautious smile. "My name's Kale," he added, his voice steady. Naira glared, unsure whether to trust him. Her spear didn't waver as she studied his face for any sign of deceit. "I'm not your friend, human," she said coldly, tightening her grip on her weapon. Kale's smile didn't falter. "Good," he said, grinning, "because right now we both have bigger problems." A distant explosion underscored his words, reminding them both of the danger still closing in. Naira lowered her spear slightly, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "Why did you save me?" she asked, suspicion still lingering in her voice. Kale shrugged, brushing dirt off his clothes. "Let's just say I'm not a fan of the people chasing you. The enemy of my enemy, and all that." Naira's brow furrowed as she considered his words. The sound of approaching drones forced her to act quickly. "All right, human," she said, lowering her spear completely. "But know this. If you betray me, your death will be swift." Kale chuckled, seemingly unfazed by the threat. "Noted. Now, shall we get moving before our friends catch up?" Together, they plunged back into the dense jungle, leaving the cliff's edge and the pursuing enemies behind. As they moved deeper into the wilds, Naira couldn't help but wonder about the strange human who had saved her life. Could she trust him? Or would this uneasy alliance lead to her downfall? After a tense truce, Naira and Kale pressed forward, deeper into the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and strange, alien birds called out from the canopy above. Kale struggled to keep up, his boots sinking into the soft, mossy ground. "So, you got a name?" he asked, breathless. "Or should I just call you Green?" Naira shot him a glare. "My name is Naira, last heir of the Velkari tribe. You would do well to remember it." Kale raised an eyebrow, impressed by her fierce pride. "All right, Naira. It's nice to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." As they walked, Kale explained that he was a mercenary, abandoned by his team after a mission went wrong. The invaders were part of a massive corporate mining operation exploiting Verdinia for its rare resources. "They don't care who they hurt," Kale said, his voice tinged with disgust. "They'll strip this planet bare and leave it to rot." Naira's fists clenched, her emerald skin darkening with anger. "I won't stop until they are free," she replied, her voice filled with quiet fury. Kale nodded, understanding the depth of her resolve. "Then let's find them," he said. "But we'll need help." The jungle soon revealed its dangers. Massive, six-legged predator beasts with sharp claws that stalked them through the underbrush. Naira's agility and spears saved them from one such ambush, her precise strikes piercing the creature's soft underbelly. The beast roared in pain, its massive tail sweeping toward them. Kale ducked just in time, feeling the wind of its passage ruffle his hair. "Nice moves," he shouted to Naira as she leaped onto the predator's back, driving her spear deep into its skull. The beast collapsed, and Naira jumped clear, landing gracefully beside him. "Your world has no beasts like this," she said, curious despite herself. Kale laughed, still catching his breath. "Nothing quite so lively. You handled that like it was nothing." Naira allowed herself a small smile. "We learned to survive from a young age." "Your skills seem more technological," Kale remarked. "Guilty as charged," he replied, patting the energy pistol at his hip. "But I'm always happy to learn new tricks." Later, they stumbled upon a nest of hive-like creatures with glowing eyes. The air hummed with their wings, and a sickly sweet smell filled the space. "Don't move," Naira whispered, her body tense. "Those are glowsworms. Their venom can paralyze you in seconds." Kale froze, his hand inching toward his weapon. "Any ideas?" Naira's eyes darted around, assessing their surroundings. They're attracted to sudden movements and bright lights. "We need a distraction." Kale grinned, pulling flares from his pack. "Will these work?" Naira nodded, impressed. "Perfect. On my signal. Throw them as far as you can, then run." Kale readied the flares, his muscles tense with anticipation. Naira counted silently, 3, 2, 1, and Kale hurled the flares in a wide arc. The bright lights drew the glowsworms, and Naira yanked Kale's arm, pulling him forward as they sprinted through the underbrush. Behind them, the angry buzz of the swarms grew louder as they made their escape, heading toward a patch of ground that looked eerily smooth. Kale realized just in time. "Is that quicksand?" he asked. Naira nodded grimly. "Our escape." With practiced ease, Naira led them around the deadly pit, and as they reached a narrow part of it, she shouted, "Jump!" Kale leapt, his heart in his throat, and landed safely on the other side. Naira followed, her lithe form sailing through the air. The swarms, too frantic to adjust, flew straight into the quicksand. Their glowing bodies vanished beneath the thick, sticky mud. Kale and Naira paused, watching from a safe distance. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," Kale said, shaking his head in amazement. Naira's expression softened. "You saved my life. For now, you're on my good side." As they continued their journey, their uneasy alliance began to solidify. They shared stories of their pasts, discovering a shared desire to protect the innocent from those who would exploit them. "So, how did a mercenary like you end up fighting against a big corporation?" Naira asked as they rested by a small stream. Kale's face darkened. "I've seen what they do to planets. They promise prosperity, but they bring nothing but destruction. I couldn't be a part of that anymore." Naira nodded, understanding. Your heart is more honorable than I first believed. Don't spread it around, Kale replied with a grin. I've got a reputation to maintain. As night fell, they made camp in the hollow of a massive tree, bioluminescent plants casting a soft blue glow over their shelter. We should reach the mining operation tomorrow, Kale said, checking his gear. Any idea what we're walking into? Naira shook her head. My people have never seen technology like theirs, but we are warriors. We will find a way. Kale nodded, impressed by her resolve. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning our assault. As Naira drifted off to sleep, she found herself grateful for Kale's presence. Perhaps, she thought, not all humans were as terrible as she had believed. The next morning, they set out early, moving quietly through the misty jungle. As they neared the forest's edge, they heard the unmistakable sound of machinery. There, Kale whispered, pointing to a clearing ahead. They crouched behind a large fern, observing a massive pit carved into the earth. Huge machines extracted glowing blue crystals from the ground, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their mechs towering over the workers below. Naira's breath caught in her throat as she spotted familiar figures among the laborers. My people, she whispered, emotion thick in her voice. Kale placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. We'll get them out, but we need a plan. As they observed, a convoy of armored transports approached, flanked by smaller, faster vehicles. Looks like they're bringing in more workers, Kale observed. Naira's eyes narrowed. We're taking some away. We must act now. They retreated into the jungle, formulating their plan. Naira drew a rough map in the dirt while Kale added details about the enemy's defenses. A frontal assault would be suicide, Kale said, shaking his head. We need to be smarter than that. Naira nodded. My people know these jungles better than anyone. If we free even a few, they can help us create diversions. Kale's eyes lit up. And while the guards are distracted, we can sabotage their equipment. Without their tech, they're just men in fancy suits. Just then a twig snapped nearby. Both Naira and Kale whipped around, weapons raised. From the bushes emerged a small group of Valkyrie natives, led by a young warrior with determination burning in his eyes. Kale! Naira exclaimed, lowering her spear. The young warrior grinned, revealing a makeshift lockpick. They underestimated us, but we're few, and many of our people are still captive. Kale stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Kale. Looks like our rescue party just got a little bigger. Kale eyed Kale warily, but shook his hand. Any friend of Naira's is a friend of ours. What's the plan? With renewed hope and new allies, they refined their strategy. Kale and his group would create distractions around the perimeter, while Naira and Kale focused on freeing the prisoners. The battle for Verdinia's freedom was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Heart of the Enemy. The air was thick with humidity as Lena and Joey crouched at the edge of the dense jungle, observing the mining operation from the shadows of the towering trees. The hum of machinery and the distant clanking of metal echoed through the clearing ahead, a stark contrast to the serene wilds they had just traversed. The glowing blue crystals being excavated from the earth shimmered like an unnatural beacon of destruction. Joey adjusted the strap of his pack, his sharp eyes scanning the scene below. That's a lot of firepower, he muttered, his voice low, eyes flicking between the armed guards patrolling the perimeter and the massive machines drilling into the earth. I don't know how we're going to get through this. Lena, still crouched beside him, clenched her fists. Her blue skin seemed to pulse with the anger rising in her chest. We will find a way, she replied coldly, her voice steady despite the fury within. My people are here, and I will not leave them in chains. Joey nodded, though a flicker of concern flashed across his face. You're not alone in this, Lena. We'll get them out. His words were firm, but there was a wariness in his voice, a recognition that the odds were stacked against them. They continued to watch as a convoy of heavily armored transports rumbled toward the site, their engines rumbling through the jungle. The smaller, faster vehicles flanked the transports, their guns gleaming in the midday sun. More prisoners, more captives to fuel the endless exploitation of Ellan's resources. More workers, Joey observed, or maybe prisoners. Lena's eyes narrowed as she spotted figures among the workers below. Some were human, but others were her own people, forced into the labor of the invaders, their heads down, shackled in silence. A knot of grief tightened in her chest, but she swallowed it down. This was not the time for weakness. "We move soon," Lena said, her tone icy with determination. "They cannot be allowed to suffer any longer." "Right," Joey replied, his gaze flicking back and forth, calculating. "We'll need to time it perfectly. Distractions, sabotage, freeing the prisoners. All of it needs to happen before they realize we're here. We won't get another shot." Lena met his gaze, her eyes sharp with resolve. "We will take them by surprise. And if we don't, we will make them regret it." The jungle around them was eerily still, as if it too was holding its breath. Joey could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the uncertainty of their plan hanging in the air. But there was something in Lena's demeanor that gave him confidence, even if the odds were against them. She was fierce, unyielding, her spirit as unbreakable as the jungle itself. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes caught their attention, and they instinctively drew their weapons, ready for any danger. From the undergrowth emerged a small group of blue-skinned natives, led by none other than Kale, the young warrior Lena had recognized earlier. His eyes burned with determination as he stepped forward, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Lena," Kale said, his voice low but filled with pride. "We escaped. We underestimated their watch, but they never expected us to slip through their fingers." Lena lowered her spear slightly, a mixture of relief and respect crossing her face. "How did you get past their patrols?" she asked, her voice softening. Kale grinned, revealing a makeshift lockpick in his hand. "They didn't expect us to be resourceful. We're few, but we are resilient." Joey stepped forward, offering his hand in greeting. "I'm Joey," he said, his tone friendly but cautious. "Looks like our rescue party just got a little bigger." Kale eyed him warily at first, but after a moment, he grasped Joey's hand firmly. "Any friend of Lena's is a friend of ours," he said, his voice tinged with both respect and wariness. Lena's heart swelled with pride for her people. "We have a plan," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "But we need your help. The invaders have fortified their position. We need to create distractions, sabotage their equipment, and free the prisoners. We can't afford to make mistakes." Kale nodded, his expression grim but resolute. "We'll do whatever it takes. Our people have been enslaved for too long." Joey, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "We'll need to split up. The perimeter is heavily guarded, but if we can distract them long enough, we might be able to get to the workers and disable the machines." Lena's eyes scanned the area once more, mentally marking the positions of the guards and the machinery. "We know this land better than they do. We can use it to our advantage. The jungle will hide us." With renewed hope, the group began to finalize their plan. Kale and his warriors would move first, creating chaos at the outer edges of the camp by triggering explosions and setting off traps. Meanwhile, Lena and Joey would infiltrate the camp, using the distractions to get closer to the prisoners and the machines. "Let's make sure the invaders never forget the day they crossed us," Lena said, her voice cold and filled with deadly resolve. As the group scattered to prepare, Lena felt a flicker of hope stir within her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to have in a long time. This wasn't just about freeing her people. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about making sure the invaders knew they were not invincible. And with Joey at her side, perhaps, just perhaps, she could make that happen. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as they moved into position, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. The battle for Ellan's future was about to begin, and Lena was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. The world around them was on the brink of change, and this time, the invaders would not go unchallenged. Chapter 3: The Heart of the Storm. The jungle was alive with the sounds of preparation. Birds chirped nervously in the canopy above, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the subtle rustle of leaves. Lena, crouched behind a large fern, her spear held tightly in her grasp, surveyed the perimeter of the enemy's camp through narrowed eyes. Joey, crouching beside her, adjusted the energy pistol at his side, his expression hard but focused. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of machinery. "Once we move, there's no turning back." Lena nodded, her gaze locked on the armored soldiers patrolling the edge of the camp. Their heavy mechs moved like giants, crushing the earth beneath them as they scanned the area with glowing visors. The workers, her people, were corralled into groups, shackled, and under constant watch. The sight fueled the rage that burned deep in Lena's chest, but she buried it, knowing that patience and precision would be their greatest weapons. "We'll wait for Kale's signal," she said, her voice cold with determination. "Once they're distracted, we make our move." Joey gave a sharp nod, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. "I trust them to make a mess of things. We need to be ready." In the distance, a faint noise reached their ears, the sharp crack of a tree branch snapping underfoot. It was the first sign of Kale's group making their move. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the distant sky suddenly erupted with fiery light. Explosions tore through the air, sending columns of smoke billowing into the sky. The soldiers' shouts rang out, followed by the sound of frantic footsteps and mechanical groans as the invaders scrambled to respond to the sudden chaos. "Kale," Lena muttered under her breath, a fierce smile pulling at her lips. Joey's eyes gleamed with approval as he watched the confusion unfold. "Looks like they don't like surprises." Lena turned to him, her gaze intense. "We move now." The two of them sprinted through the underbrush, using the dense foliage to stay hidden as they moved closer to the camp. The ground beneath their feet was soft and uneven, but Lena's steps were sure, her training guiding her through the thick jungle. Joey struggled to keep pace, his boots sinking into the mossy earth, but he didn't falter. As they neared the edge of the camp, the sounds of confusion grew louder. The distant explosions had sent the guards into a frenzy, and many were now rushing toward the source of the disturbance. Lena held up a hand, signaling for Joey to stop. She crouched low, peering around a large rock to assess their next move. Several guards were stationed near a heavily fortified structure, likely a command post, while others were scattering to secure the perimeter. The workers, still shackled, were being herded into a large cage near the center of the camp. "We need to reach the workers and free them," Lena whispered, her voice low but filled with urgency. "Once they're free, they can help us sabotage their machines." Joey scanned the area, his mind working quickly. "We don't have much time. We need a diversion." Lena's eyes flicked to the nearby guard towers, tall, intimidating structures with searchlights mounted at the top. "I'll create the diversion," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "You head for the cages." Before Joey could protest, she was already moving, her body flowing silently through the shadows of the camp. Joey hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded, slipping into the opposite direction. Lena's heart pounded as she sprinted toward the guard towers, the sound of her footfalls muffled by the dense underbrush. She reached the base of the tower without being seen and quickly scaled it, using the trees around her to move swiftly and quietly. The tower creaked under her weight, but she knew the sound would be lost in the chaos below. Once at the top, Lena took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the camp below. The searchlights were still on, sweeping across the area, but they were distracted, their focus shifting to the explosions still echoing in the distance. Lena grinned, reaching for a small device tucked into her belt, one of the explosives Kale's group had used to create the diversion. She set it carefully on the searchlight, her fingers working with precise movements. Then, with a final glance toward the camp, she detonated it. The explosion was smaller than the others, but it was enough to send the searchlight tumbling to the ground in a shower of sparks and metal. The guards on the tower scrambled, shouting in confusion as the light flickered out. Lena took her cue. She slipped down from the tower, moving quickly and quietly toward the cage holding the workers. Her eyes locked onto the shackles binding her people, her fists clenched with a burning desire to set them free. She reached the cage and quickly assessed the lock. It was a complicated mechanism, but it was nothing she couldn't handle. With a quick glance over her shoulder, she drew a sharp blade from her belt and sliced through the lock in one fluid motion. The metal clanged to the ground, and the door to the cage creaked open. Get out! Lena hissed, her voice low but urgent. Quickly, before they notice. The workers, confused and fearful, hesitated for only a moment before they spilled out of the cage, their eyes wide with disbelief. Lena didn't wait for them to question her. She ushered them toward the jungle, her spear in hand and ready to fight. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Lena glanced over her shoulder to see Joey, emerging from the shadows. He had freed another group of workers from a second cage, and they were now heading toward the tree line, their shackles discarded. But the victory was short-lived. A sudden shout pierced the air, an alarm. The invaders had spotted them. "Move!" Lena shouted, her voice fierce as she pushed the freed prisoners ahead of her. "We can't stop now." The ground shook as the heavy mechs began to advance, their footsteps reverberating through the jungle, accompanied by the sound of energy weapons charging. "Not fast enough," Joey muttered as he reached Lena's side. "We need to slow them down, or we're all dead." Lena's eyes narrowed as she turned to face the incoming threat. She raised her spear, the crystal tip glowing bright with energy, her heart beating with a mix of fury and determination. "Let's make them regret ever stepping foot on Ellan," she growled, her voice full of righteous fury. As the mechs loomed closer, Lena and Joey prepared for their next move, knowing that the battle for Ellan was far from over. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Lena felt a spark of hope. They were fighting back. They were not alone, and they were going to win. Chapter 4. The Battle for Ellan. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as Lena and Joey stood side by side, their backs to the freed prisoners, their eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. The heavy, thunderous steps of the mech suits reverberated through the earth, and the sharp whine of energy weapons charging sent a shiver down Lena's spine. She could feel the weight of the battle pressing in around her, but there was no turning back now. "They're coming fast," Joey said, his voice steady but taut with tension. He checked the energy levels in his weapon and gave Lena a quick glance. "How do you want to do this?" Lena's grip on her spear tightened, the crystal tip glowing brightly in the dim light of the jungle. "We don't have time for subtlety," she said. "We take them head-on, create chaos, and get the prisoners out. We can't let them regroup." Joey nodded, his jaw set with grim resolve. "Understood." The first of the mechs appeared through the trees, massive and imposing, its armored legs crushing everything in its path. Its pilot, hidden behind a sleek black visor, was oblivious to the two figures crouched in the shadows. But Lena wasn't going to give them that luxury. With a swift, fluid motion, she hurled a knife embedded with a small explosive charge at the mech's leg. It hit with a dull thud and exploded in a flash of light and smoke. The mech stumbled, its legs buckling under the sudden damage. A roar of frustration echoed from its pilot as the machine struggled to regain balance. "Now!" Lena shouted. Joey sprinted forward, his boots pounding against the earth, and fired his energy pistol at the nearest group of soldiers. The first guard dropped to the ground, disintegrated by the high-powered shot. He didn't wait for the others to respond. He was already moving, reloading as he dashed toward another group of enemies. Lena charged in alongside him, her spear flashing with deadly precision as she moved through the chaos. She struck fast, her blade cutting through the air, finding the weak points in the armor of the soldiers. Each strike was purposeful, each movement calculated, as she dismantled the enemy's forces one by one. But there were too many of them. The mechs began to reorient themselves, now aware of the threat. The energy beams from their weapons lit up the jungle, their deadly fire crackling through the air, forcing Lena and Joey to move with even greater speed. "Lena!" Joey shouted as he dodged an incoming blast. "We need to pull back. We can't take them all down like this." Lena didn't answer at first, her gaze fixed on the mech that had regained its balance. The pilot inside was aiming a massive cannon at them, preparing to fire. "Get down!" she shouted, throwing herself into a roll just as the cannon fired. The blast exploded behind them, sending debris and fire scattering in all directions. Joey was already on his feet, pulling her with him as they dove behind a large boulder. The explosion had left them momentarily stunned, but they were alive. Barely. Lena's chest heaved as she caught her breath, eyes scanning the smoke-filled air for any sign of the enemy's next move. "We can't keep doing this," she muttered, her mind racing. "We need to get the prisoners to safety." Joey nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I've got an idea," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "I'll take care of the mechs. You get the prisoners moving. Find a way to slow them down long enough for us to escape." Lena looked at him, the intensity in her gaze matching the fire in his. She didn't question him. "Do it." Joey ran toward the mech, moving with purpose as he drew a larger, more powerful weapon from his pack. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. He fired it once, twice, his shots hitting the mech's exposed joints. The mech's movement slowed, its system struggling to repair the damage. Joey didn't give it a moment's reprieve, aiming another round at its power core. The mech screeched in protest, sparks flying as its systems overloaded. With a final, deafening blast, it fell to the ground, disabled. Lena took her chance. She rushed toward the prisoners, her voice carrying across the chaos. "This way. Move quickly." Her words were like a lifeline, and the workers, many of them were people, responded, scrambling toward the safety of the jungle. Behind her, the sound of more mechs charging up their weapons echoed through the air. They weren't done yet, but Lena was determined. She would not lose anyone else today. Joey rejoined her as the last of the prisoners made their way through the jungle, his face covered in grime, but his eyes sharp. "We got them moving," he said. "Let's go." Lena nodded, her heart still racing as they ran. The jungle seemed to close in around them, but they pushed through, the mech still in pursuit. They weren't out of danger yet. But as they reached a clearing, something unexpected happened. The ground shook, and from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing, another group of fighters emerged. These were different from the invaders, blue-skinned warriors, more agile and powerful than any human soldier, their weapons flashing as they moved with precision. The invaders hesitated, unsure how to respond to the new threat. But it didn't take long for them to realize their mistake. The warriors were a force to be reckoned with. Lena stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The Zarai," she breathed. "They've come." Kale, the young warrior who had freed some of the prisoners, stood at the front, his spear raised high. "You didn't think we'd let you do this alone, did you?" he called, a grin spreading across his face. With renewed strength, the Zarai charged into the fight, their war cries echoing through the jungle. The mechs, now surrounded, were no match for the combined force of the native warriors and the determined prisoners who had taken up arms. Lena and Joey fought side by side with the Zarai, their combined strength overwhelming the invaders. One by one, the enemy forces fell, and the jungle began to quiet, the sound of battle fading away. When the last of the invaders was defeated, Lena stood, panting and covered in dirt, her spear still in hand. She turned to Kale, who had been fighting fiercely alongside her. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Kale nodded, his face serious but proud. "You led us. You gave us hope." Joey, standing beside them, glanced around the clearing, the adrenaline still pulsing through his veins. "And now we have a chance to win." Lena looked toward the horizon, the rising sun casting a warm light over the jungle. The battle was far from over, but today they had won. "Let's go," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We fight until the end. We won't stop until Ellan is free." And with that, they set off once more, the jungle ahead of them, but no longer a place of fear. It was a place of hope, a place where they could finally fight back.